Welcome to Trash Talk MMA, the #1 podcast for news and insight that matters in the world of mixed martial arts. Brought to you live and unfiltered from all four corners of the globe by MMA aficionado, Antoine Peltier.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Trash Talk MMA podcast. I'm your host, Antoine Peltier. So for this episode, which might be a little bit dated by the time it comes out, I'd like to pretty much review UFC 182. Before UFC 182 came out, I wrote up a pretty extensive preview blog. So I think what I'm going to do for this episode is read what my predictions were in my blog, and then discuss the actual outcomes and take it from there. So in the main event, of course, we had Jon Jones versus Daniel Cormier for the light heavyweight title. Billed as the latest, biggest grudge match in UFC history, the animosity certainly feels legit. I watched the Countdown show for the first time in eons, and I must admit that I'm amped for this one. Has Jones really ever faced someone like Cormier? Let's look. Of all his opponents, without getting into hyper-specifics, I'd say the closest guy Jon has fought with a similar skill set would be Rashad Evans, a decorated wrestler with huge punching power. Jon dominated that fight with ease, and it had a very similar bad blood build-up. I actually hated that fight, mostly because Evans is probably the biggest bust when it comes to heavily trash-talking and then underperforming. Daniel Cormier feels like a Rashad 2.0, before Rashad's loss to Lyoto. Undefeated, intimidating, some big-name wins, but really, I'm still not impressed like everyone else seems to be, based purely on in-cage performances and wins. He couldn't stop Josh Barnett past his prime, nor Roy Nelson, nor Frank Mir. He KO'd Bigfoot Silva, but so did a way past his prime Arlovsky a few months ago. DC is a natural heavyweight who ragdolled the natural middleweight in Dan Henderson and gets a title shot off that win. In summary, DC got to the UFC by winning the Strikeforce Heavyweight Grand Prix and is getting this title shot after decisioning two heavyweight wash-ups / gatekeepers, Nelson and Mir, destroying a tomato can on 2 weeks' notice in Patrick Cummings, and subbing a mid-40s middleweight legend in Hendo. At least he's on a winning streak, right? Not always the case in the UFC for several high-profile title fights. Now Jones, let's just say it. Best fighter ever. Already. Destroyed Glover in his last fight, War of the Century versus Gustafsson in a debatable decision that I felt justifiably went Jones's way even though I was rooting for Gus. Tooled Chael Sonnen, one of those debatable title fights I was just referring to. Subbed Vitor, who has been in absolute beast mode of late. Top 3 scariest fighter currently in the UFC along with Anthony Johnson and Yoel Romero. Tooled Rashad, annihilated Lyoto, blitzkrieg Rampage, humiliated Shogun, the list goes on. Most impressive run of wins in the sport ever. Now the tail of the tape is where it gets very ugly. Jones will enjoy a 5-inch height advantage and a 12-inch reach advantage. He's also 8 years younger than DC, and I agree with Jones when he states that age will play a factor in this fight. Bottom line, Jones is winning this fight, within 3 rounds max. I'm going to say TKO stoppage in round 2. Jones is simply taller, longer, faster, more versatile, unpredictable, and devastating when it matters most. DC won't be able to manhandle him, won't be able to match his speed and tool set, and won't get lucky. And when he goes inside, he's going to eat horrifying shots coming in and then face the Jones we saw versus Glover in the pocket in the clinch, and that was nasty. I'm seriously shocked how many pros are picking Cormier to win, and hey, as insiders, maybe they know something I don't, but I'm going to go off all the hard facts I've presented here as the basis for my prediction. It's just not Jones's time to lose yet, and DC is not the man to do it. Feel free to debate and correct me if I'm wrong. If anything, I give the winner of Gus versus AJ on January 24th a much better chance. So that was my prediction that Jones would win by TKO in either the second or third round. Obviously, as we know, the fight went 5 rounds with Jones taking a dominant decision. My thoughts on the fight, underwhelming. It was disappointing. I was expecting a lot more hunger from Daniel Cormier. I was hoping to see him put Jones in trouble. But really, Jones went out there and almost GSP'd him in that he attacked him at his own game. He was the one often initiating the clinch, the positions that, most thought Cormier would benefit from being in to win the fight and get some points. And there was just a lot of holding, a lot of clinching in the center of the cage. Not a whole lot of really interesting action, and not a whole lot of innovation out of Jones. But to his credit, I mean, he went in there, he never looked like he was in trouble, and after the third round, it was pretty evident that he had actually broken the self-proclaimed iron will of Daniel Cormier. So kudos to Jones for going in, with no fear and putting on another impressive display of dominance, against the highest ranked guy in his division. Pretty deflating loss for Daniel Cormier. It'll be interesting to see really who they put him against coming out of this. Maybe the loser of Gustafsson versus Johnson. But it's going to be interesting to see how much time he takes and where his mind's at coming back into this, because you can tell that he really wanted this, and things certainly did not go his way that night. So further down the card, there was the co-main event between Donald Cerrone and Miles Jury. This was my prediction. I like Jury. He looked great in defeating two guys that were extremely impressive ages ago in Diego and Gomi, but he's not winning this. Cerrone is in absolute beast mode these days, steamrolling through Dunham, Martins, Barboza, Miller, and Alvarez since losing to Rafael dos Anjos back in August of 2013. It'll be a fun fight, though, and I'm hoping we'll see what sort of grit Jury can bring to the table. Grit, however, is Cerrone's middle name. The silver lining here for Jury is that Cowboy has taken his 5th fight in less than a year, and the last time he was this prolific, he got torn to pieces by Nate Diaz back in 2011. Cerrone by TKO, or a convincing decision, but Jury could shock the world if Cerrone comes in underestimating Jury, like he appears to be in the Countdown show. So that was my prediction for Cerrone versus Jury. Cerrone taking it, and he did, as I said by the TKO or a convincing decision, and it was certainly a convincing decision. He could have finished the fight in the first round. Kudos to Jury for hanging in there and avoiding that submission, but it looked like the fight was set in stone within the first minute. Basically, Cerrone got him down, totally controlled him, almost submitted him, and then from there just hammered away on him for 2 rounds, the last 2 rounds. So Cerrone looked good, and since then, the date that I'm recording this, he's actually already fought again and defeated Benson Henderson in a fight that I feel should have definitely gone Henderson's way, but I will cover that in a podcast after this one, since we'll want to stick to UFC 182. So yeah, I mean, Cerrone, he's going to need to fight Khabib or something like that. He needs to get a title shot going here. The guy's putting a ton of work. He's been looking great. He's super popular. I think he'd make for a great champion in the UFC. Exactly the type of guy that they'd want to have in that position. Not that there's any problem whatsoever with Anthony Pettis, that's for sure. As far as Jury, yeah, lots of work to do. I mean, it looked like his will got broken pretty quickly, and I think he was pretty humble post-fight, saying that it was a pretty humiliating experience. And yeah, he looked like, I mean, kudos to him for not getting stopped by Cerrone. But he certainly didn't bring anything to the table there that showed that he can hang with the top 5. So he'll probably want to take a fight against somebody in the upper top 10 of the division and get a solid win. And he's going to need to build on that grit, as I mentioned in the prediction, because he didn't really appear to have any in that fight at all. So in the third fight on the main card of UFC 182, we had the middleweight contest between Brad Tavares and Nate Marquardt. This was my prediction. Nate the not so great anymore, back at middleweight since his quick finish on James Tahuna in June. Before that, he got crushed 3 times at welterweight in his final Strikeforce fight and returned to the UFC. Brad Tavares was looking very solid for a minute, going on a 5-fight winning streak before running into the killing machine that is Yoel Romero. But give him credit for taking it to a decision, and then losing a stupid TKO to Tim Boetsch in a fight Tavares was brilliantly dominating. Nate has more to lose in this fight. He was a somebody that hasn't beat a somebody since an awesome KO of then little-known Tyrone Woodley in Strikeforce back in July 2012. That being said, Tavares has never been a somebody and needs this win to hope to ever become one. Bit of a coin toss here, but I'm going to side with Marquardt. He's got the momentum. Coming off an impressive win, and middleweight is where he belongs. Wouldn't be surprised, though, to see his age and experience exposed by a younger and hungrier Tavares who has, despite the recent losses, looked very good for the past 4 years. All this being said, neither of these guys will ever be top 5 in the UFC, in my opinion. So that was my prediction. Basically, I said it was going to be a coin toss. Sided with Marquardt, but it got taken, a nice decision by Tavares. I mean, frankly, Nate Marquardt, I don't really want to see him fight anymore. He's part of that generation of UFC fighters whose time has come and gone. He stopped the TRT as well. Hasn't really been the same since. Dropped to 170. Besides the Woodley win, never really looked right there. He got bashed by Tariq Saffiedine. He got slaughtered by Hector Lombard. I like Marquardt. He has a good legacy. I think if he continues any further, he's just going to tarnish it. I think he should step down and coach, run his gym, do something like that. But I mean, I don't really have an interest in seeing Marquardt fight anymore. Tavares, on the other hand, I mean, he did what he does. He's obviously a young, strong, athletic, well-rounded guy. He goes out there and he wins fights, but it's been a while since he's done anything really impressive. So I'm not really sure where Tavares goes from here. I mean, he obviously goes up because he gets a win, but I don't know if anyone's really ever clamoring to see this kid fight. I know he doesn't really bring anything to the table that gets me overly excited, but he's a solid guy, and he's young and has a lot of future. So I guess it just depends how he kicks up his training and what he can bring to the table in future contests. So next, in the second fight of the main card of UFC 182, we had a flyweight fight between Kyoji Horiguchi and Luis Godinez. Most people won't care about this fight, but they should, as one of these guys will become a flyweight contender in the mix with a win. The smart money is on Kyoji, who's 14-1 with his lone loss being a majority decision way back in January 2012. I really like Godinez, durable and unpredictable, but he's going to be a bit rusty and has only had 4 fights in 3 years. How this guy eats is beyond me. Versus Kyoji's 9 in the same time frame. Expect a barn burner though, as Godinez always puts on awesome fights, win or lose, with Kyoji taking this one way or another. Yeah, so that was my prediction that Kyoji would take this fight, and he did by decision. However, the fight was no barn burner. If I remember correctly, it was just pretty much 2 flyweights running around, throwing punches that don't knock people out. It really had nothing memorable about it. And I remember people I was watching the fight with pretty much agreed that that this put a bit of a lull into the momentum of the entire event. So, Godinez, rusty, Kyoji, decision win. Not looking forward to really either guy moving forward, and not really sure how they ended up on the card. I guess they figured that it would be a barn burner as well, and on fight night, the guys just didn't really show up and throw down the way they should have. And finally, in the opening fight of UFC 182, we saw a welterweight showdown between Hector Lombard and Josh Burkman. Yeesh. Burkman has a pair the size of grapefruits on him, I'll give him that. No one on the planet wants to fight Lombard, and Burkman, in his UFC return, thinks he has what it takes to hand him a loss. Burkman has certainly enjoyed a resurgence of late, blasting through some solid former UFC fighters, stopping Aaron Simpson, and most notably John Fitch in the process. But Lombard is going to make this very ugly and nasty very quickly. Lombard by pugilistic destruction round 1. So that was my prediction, that Lombard would take this in 1 round, but for anybody who watched it, yeah, the fight was just another weird fight, which somehow Lombard tends to get into. A lot of his UFC fights have been kind of just awkward and haven't played out the way everybody figured they would. Josh Burkman, tough, but kind of a bizarre strategy, dropping his hands, just begging Lombard to crack him in the face, and Lombard obliged, except he didn't stop him, didn't knock him out, but tore him up. Some nasty leg kicks. Lombard looked good. I mean, it looked like a freight train, but how he wasn't able to stop Burkman with the opportunities that Burkman presented him to do so was pretty awkward, and just Burkman's entire strategy was awkward. So that was just a weird fight that set a weird tone for the card, actually, especially with the fight that followed it after. I don't know what they're going to do with Burkman moving forward. He certainly put on a display of toughness that warrants him another scrap in the UFC. I'd have to sort of look who's on the roster and see what makes sense. Maybe somebody like a Rick Story or something like that. But I guess Lombard's going to be taking on Rory McDonald, and that's the fight that needs to be made. I think Lombard needs to be given a fight that where there's some real possibility for danger, and McDonald presents that, and that's going to make for a good number 1 contender fight, or a number 2 contender fight if depending on who wins that one. Especially if one of them can stop the other, that'll be an impressive feat. For the rest of the fights on the card, namely the prelims, I had this to say. The prelims are typical of late UFC fare, with the occasional sort of somebody, Castillo, Brimage, Jordan, fighting the total nobody, Felder, Garbrandt, Cannonier, okay. But Evan Dunham and Rodrigo Dam should bring it, with Dunham emerging victorious, covered in blood from head to toe, which is always amusing. So, What actually happened? Well, Evan Dunham did defeat Rodrigo Dam. He didn't even need to get covered in blood, and that was just another strange performance. I think on Dam's behalf, he was doing the whole Diaz thing, constantly telling Dunham to bring it, constantly keeping his hands down, and constantly eating shots. And every time he asked Dunham to bring it, Dunham did just that and just teed off on him and used him for a punching bag for 15 minutes. This is another fight in this long list of fighters of late who believe that just advancing and using their face to stop punches warrants victories. I think I'm going to do an entire podcast dedicated to that whole topic pretty soon, because it's definitely current. It seems like a lot of guys have been doing it, ever since Edgar Garcia and Diego Sanchez became kind of famous for it. We saw Brian Caraway do it in his last fight. We saw Rodrigo Dam do it here, and it's like, I don't know, man. You can't win fights by just eating shots and telling people to bring it. You're in the fight. Use that energy to win the fight yourself and generate offense. Then I was a little harsh on some of these guys that I referred to as total nobodies. In particular, Felder versus Castillo. Felder looked awesome. He looked long. He looked very precise with his striking, very unpredictable. I liked how he was lifting up his knees whenever Castillo would come in, and then he caught him with a spinning back fist from hell and absolutely starched him. So, Felder, you are officially no longer a total nobody. You're on your way to becoming a somebody, so good work. And I really liked the Garbrandt-Brimage fight as well. I like Brimage. Brimage always comes to fight, always puts it all on the line, and he certainly did in this fight. And Garbrandt was cocky, but backed it up and smashed Brimage and knocked him out late in the third round. So that was a great fight. And Sean Jordan, once again, he came out and blasted his opponent, made short work of him, and looked really good in the process too. The fact that the guy's pulling off backflips at 300 pounds or whatever he weighs, it's pretty amusing and awesome. So my final thoughts on UFC 182. Well, it was the first major event of the new year. The hype was huge. I was actually really excited to see it. I mean, I wouldn't have written a preview of this length and depth if I wasn't looking forward to it, but I was pretty disappointed. I thought Cormier didn't bring it, and he really, really needed to. He really needed to back up all the trash talk and the bad blood that was built up before. He got taken out of the fight pretty quickly, pretty easily, and that was disappointing. Miles Jury didn't really show up either, so it made for a somewhat, a one-sided co-main event victory for Cerrone. Tavares and Marquardt was just an inconsequential fight in the grand scheme of things, as was Horiguchi and Gaudino. And, Lombard and Berkman was just a weird fight that just didn't play out in any real entertaining way that mattered. So, I'm glad that I did watch all the prelims, though. The Castillo fight with Felder was great, as I mentioned. The Brimage fight with Garbrandt was great. The Jordan knockout was awesome. And, Dunham looked good against Rodrigo Dam. So, I don't know, I guess if I had to rate the event, I'd maybe give it a 6 out of 10, but, expectations were super high for this event, and, the co-main and the main event really just didn't deliver, so, I can't score it really much higher than a 6. Alright, that's it for this episode, guys. I'm Antoine Pelletier. This is the Trash Talk MMA podcast, and, we'll get back to you shortly. Thanks for tuning in. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Trash Talk MMA podcast. Be sure to visit trashtalkmma.com. And don't forget to follow Antoine on Twitter at TrashTalkMMA. Let us know you're listening. Use hashtag TrashTalkMMA.